Welcome to a very special edition of ACFIM Talks. Today, the 25th of August, 2023. These are 2 days after Zimbabwe, as a country, went to the polls. And that's why I'm calling it a special edition, because we are putting into focus the elections in Zimbabwe decides 2023, and trying to make sense of the election. And with me, I'll be introducing two distinguished gentlemen who have been following the Zim elections to share their insights. But for those who are just joining us, you are most welcome to ACFIM Talks, the special edition. My name is Felix Akafuma, who's going to be the host and the moderator for the show. And we're here running from 12 p.m. East African time until probably 1:30 p.m. East African time, so that we can make sense of what's happening. So I encourage everybody to grab a cup of coffee, join us, be part of this conversation. We are live on YouTube, also live on our social media platforms, ACFIM, including live on Twitter and as well Facebook. So you can be part of the conversation. You can post your questions there. But without much ado, allow me to take this off the ground and provide a bit of a context to the discussion. If you are been following what's happening around Africa, all eyes are on Zim, who are conducting the elections. They actually concluded casting the ballots on the 23rd of August in what they call the harmonized elections in Zimbabwe, which has been characterized by all manner of irregularities, not the least extended delays in the way the delivery of election materials to the polling stations have been handled, issues around the arrest and detention of citizen observers, having given trumped up charges. I think we shall get an update on that as well from McDonald. There have been a number of other issues concerning the intimidation of voters, issues around internet degrade, and also allegations on vote buying. If you've been following, you'll also be able to track the fact that voting has been delayed in a couple of polling stations. Yesterday, some places in Harare and Bulawayo provinces, the polling materials came late. Again, we'll be having an insight into that anomaly from McDonald, and also Henry, who is joining us in this discussion, as well as aspects to do with extending voting hours by the Zimbabwe Electoral Commission. But also President Mnangagwa, who is the incumbent but also contesting, is published a proclamation declaring yesterday, the 24th of August, that there will be an additional polling day for over 500 wards in Manishaland, Mashonaland, Central, and Harare provinces. These elections that are in focus are being overshadowed by also the raiding of the data centers for Zimbabwe Electoral Support Network, ZESIN, and also the Election Resource Center, ERC. And apparently 38 citizen observers were arrested and detained until today with trumped up charges of engaging in subversive and criminal activities. African observer networks such as FIONET, that is African Election Observers Network, also others like EHON, which is the Eastern Horn Africa Election Observers Network, and also West African Election Observer Networks have all condemned the act. They put out press statements yesterday, and they called for the immediate and unconditional release of the citizen observers, including the UN Special Rapporteur of Human Rights Defenders, Mary Lalore, who also has been very outspoken on the issue about the arrest of the citizen observers of ZESIN and ERC. So today, like I said, we're making sense of whatever is happening in Zimbabwe. I understand that results are starting to trickle in. Again, we shall be getting a bit of update on that one. But want to make sense of the Zimbabwe elections, and joined by two distinguished political scientists and experts on African democracy. Let me first introduce McDonald Lewanika, who is the regional director of Southern Africa Accountability Lab, is also a national of Zimbabwe. I hope you did vote. You will share your experiences, and he's also a political scientist and an expert in African politics. McDonald, you're most welcome.
Thank you so much, Felix.
Great. And also I'm joined with me, I have Henry Muguzi, who is a political scientist. He's also a democracy expert. He's a Ugandan national who has been following the events in Zimbabwe. He's also an election observer expert. He's the coordinator of ACFIM's African Election Observers Network. Henry, you're most welcome.
Thank you very much, Felix, and a pleasure for me to be here and speak on a matter that should concern all Compos Mentis Africans.
Thank you so much. So let's get this rolling. I'm really glad to be part of this conversation as well. Let me start with you, Chief Lewanika. You are a Zimbabwean, and I'm so sure you voted. Probably you will disprove me on that one, but I'm so sure you voted. But I was looking at a piece you wrote. There's a brief you wrote earlier on, which was titled "Battleground Constituencies in Zimbabwe 2023 Elections." Quite interesting. What are the key thoughts that you were trying to bring to the fore, McDonald? Can you share what was your line of thought at that point?
Okay, no, thanks a lot, Felix. Let me start by reassuring you that I voted in Harare on election day on the 23rd. 7 p.m. Usually polls would have closed by that time, but I was able to cast my vote. The delay, the delay in me exercising my constitutional duty, my patriotic duty to vote, was as a result of the challenges that you have alluded to. The late distribution of electoral materials at the constituency where I was voting. Materials only came at around 2:30, and at that point I realized that the queues were way too long and decided to go home and come back after 7, after which I had a fairly pleasant and smooth voting experience despite being late. So please be assured that I am a stakeholder in the conversation, both as an analyst and as a voter myself. Now, with regards to that you alluded to, it was actually the third in a series of about 4 articles that I have written on the elections. The first one was around election observation and what we expect from election observers. It was primarily targeted at the European Union Election Observer Mission because it is big. It has raised a lot of interest by the fact that they have sent a delegation to Zimbabwe. So I will not talk about that. But that was the first. The second, and perhaps more important for this conversation, was around the political environment ahead of the elections. And what I was trying to express in that particular article was, number one, to give a lay of the land political in terms of what people could expect when the elections were concerned on account of the terrain as it stood at that particular point in time. And amongst the key issues that I was trying to highlight was the litigious nature of this election process. You and I both know, and Henry knows this better than all of us, that the hallmark of credible elections is one that is centered around procedural certainty and outcome uncertainty. But what we had in Zimbabwe was a lot of uncertainty around the procedures surrounding these elections, and I wanted to highlight those and speak to how they then point towards a preconceived or predictable outcome, which is not supposed to be the situation. The last piece, the one that you referred to around battlegrounds, was basically meant to outline that the electoral process in Zimbabwe is not necessarily a foregone conclusion, despite the unlevel play that is there, that there are constituencies which are fairly competitive, and if the opposition is able to turn those around, it is possible that we can have the opposition emerging victorious in this election. However, on the other hand, if the ruling party is able to defend these provinces and some of these constituencies, then we are likely to have a stalemate or a continuation of the status quo ante. But at this point in time, I think that the important things really relate to issues of the process, because they impact negatively on the outcomes of the elections themselves, as I'm hoping we'll be able to engage on as the conversation goes on.
Wow, thank you so much, McDonald. And let me follow up on that one, because the interesting things you mentioned, there was something around you single out the limitations on the inherent unfairness of ZIM's fast past the post-electoral system. How is this now playing out, including some of the battleground constituencies you really mentioned? You single out, and interestingly, they are part of those where the election materials arrived late and where elections started late. So where casting of the ballot started late. Can we say that your fears or your concerns are starting to play out in the way this election has been conducted?
Yeah, so you cannot take away the delays in ballot distribution in Harare and Bulawayo, which are the two biggest metropolitan provinces, away from issues of where the election is concerned. I think one of the things that's quite clear, and I argued this in the piece, that one way that the election is if they must vote in rural areas where they are strong, minimize opposition in urban. I think they successfully did that through this. There were a clear attempt at urban voter suppression. Unfortunately, a lot of people will focus on the outcomes of the first past the post system. So right now, members of the opposition and others are celebrating victories in Harare, victories in Bulawayo. But there is no doubt that what happened yesterday with the delays, the turnout, and also affected margins of victory could have attained. Yet ultimately, this may on the parliamentary candidates because of the first past the post system, but the reductions in turnout, the reductions in voting margins will have a huge impact on the ability of the opposition to actually compete and win the presidency. So those things are big to play. Kudos to the citizens and continue to vote, but I am fairly certain that they are who lost patience and went away, leading to the achievement of the voter suppression that could have been entailed or anticipated by the delays. And this is a far-fetched thought, Felix and Henry. One of that is quite disturbing that we learned today was actually an admission from the Zimbabwe Electoral Commission itself that when it comes to observers, there are a number of civic society leaders that they were told not to accredit by state security. So clearly you have an election that is not necessarily being run by independent election management body. You're having an election that is being presided over by state security who are in the employ of a candidate who is in the election. So some of these things are clearly politically calculated to ensure that competition is limited where the incumbent is concerned. Unfortunately, through some of the dirty tactics and different logistical gaffes that we saw on voting day in Zimbabwe.
Interesting. Let me bring you in here, Henry. I'm so sure you seem to be drawing parallels with the Ugandan situation. Because let me first pick your brain here, and what do you make of the Zimbabwe 2023 election so far? From where you stand, your standpoint.
Yeah, I thank you very much, Felix, and of course, thank you very much, McDonald. Quite interesting to have you on set. I want to rise from the point McDonald makes about the credibility of the election, where you have to look at procedural certainty, but also outcome certainty. And in terms of procedure, you would see, and as we have learned for the longest time, that in Africa, most of the things that are that determine the outcome of elections are those that are done way before an election takes place. So that by the time international observers come in, they have already determined the outcome, and therefore they can let election day be as peaceful as it could get, so that the election observers can say the election was peaceful, materials were delivered, blah 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 blah. Maybe there was credibility. But in case of the harmonized Zimbabwe elections, what we have seen on election day, but of course, before I say that, the process itself, you would see that contestants such as Kasukuwere, Sevilla were not allowed to contest. You would see that in there are places where CCC candidates were not allowed to be nominated. The imposition of those hefty fees, nomination fees, that made sure some opposition candidates are left out. There are quite a number of things that you would see from the process, so that which you would help you to arrive at a conclusion that in terms of behavior, procedural certainty, you don't expect a fair election. But coming to election day, this is one thing we did not expect, because I had hoped that for purposes of sanitizing and putting up a show, appearance, they would have let election day go seamless. But starting from the delays in delivery of polling materials in areas which you would call opposition strongholds, the conduct, there was that disturbing point of exit polls where there were desks placed near polling stations and they were being manned by ZANU-PF, operatives. And they, of course, on paper, they are saying that they are conducting exit polls. And of course, these exit polls by any means are legal. But the issue is in the substance, that exit polls are being conducted by operatives of ZANU-PF, who is a participant in the elections, and being done on the elder area, but are also placed in rural areas. I think the listeners have to understand that in Zimbabwe, in order for you to be able to till your land, you need to access fertilizers, and it is ZANU-PF that gives out these fertilizers. If it transpires that you do not vote for them, you'll run a risk of not getting these fertilizers, and that means almost a life to the citizens. There were issues of, the issue of arrest of citizen observers, which as I have just seen, you are mentioning, Felix, but I saw that the US has also come up with a statement condemning this act, in addition to the UN rapporteurs. But the arrest of citizen observers, citizens observing their own election, citizens being citizens, having rights already as citizens, you arrest them for observing their own elections and trying to make sense of the election. Is that a crime? And then you shamelessly slap on them a charge of engaging in subversive activities. What is subversive about citizens trying to make sense of their own election in their own country? Okay, but also the issue of the misinformation, disinformation. There were reports by one of the observers in one polling center, I think it was Chipinge polling station, where more than 30% of the voting was done through assisted voting. That is a huge percentage. For us who understand the democracy of and the dynamics of Africa, you would say this translates into controlling voter consent, because you see, the reason they are pretending to be assisted is to make sure that they have voted for a particular candidate, and most of these, I have to assure you, will have voted for ZANU-PF. That's why they are being assisted, to ensure that doesn't go wrong. So in brief, you are seeing what we had already called out before. I think a week prior to this election, we said all conditions are in place to tell that the elections, that Zimbabwe is likely to have a zombie election come 23rd August 2023. And of course, what we have seen, all the characteristics, it ticks all the boxes of a zombie election. And for those listening to us and don't understand what a zombie election is, it is an election that is recognizable only in form, but devoid of any substance. In other words, we are talking about the living dead of an election. It is not an election you can talk about. It's a dead election. It is only being done to legitimize the tenure of Mnangagwa in office. And therefore, we have concerns. We have concerns about the arrest of citizen observers, because citizen observers from last year, having been recognized as human rights defenders, they need to defend them. Someone has to be there to defend democracy. Democracy, citizens are the biggest stakeholder, the most important stakeholder in any election. And how dare you get to arrest them? And what kind of message are you putting across? And can anyone any international observation teams out there come out with a report which is short of calling the election as having lacked in credibility, in fairness, I think we have something complex. And lastly, Felix, for us who live in Uganda, when we realized that Mnangagwa had come running secretly to meet with Museveni here in Uganda, who is now turning out to be the grand Ayatollah in the region, we knew that it was a foregone conclusion that there's going to be a replica of what happened in Uganda in 2021 on that 14th day of January, which was election day. Colleagues, the viewers should also understand, those who didn't follow Uganda, on that very day, I and many of the organizations that were participating in observing the elections, we had about 30 state operatives, security operatives, raiding our data center. They arrested 26 people and they detained them for 3 days, and they were accusing us of organizing an illegal data center. But at 3 p.m. in the afternoon, when we were arrested, there was even no result to tally. So the thing is, this is a ploy now being done because we know that African autocrats are speaking to each other. We know that when Mnangagwa came and spoke to Museveni, he should have told him that that's one of the tricks. And what do we see? He applies the same tactic, except now the charges. For us, we are being charged with operating an illegal talent center. Now they're saying engaging in subversive activities. These are the same things that are happening, and this is what is worrying democracy in Africa. And if you see the resurgence of coup d'etat in West Africa, you would only tell that it could easily become a domino in Africa. And the reason it could be a domino in Africa is that a country that has tested the coups before is always a candidate for coup d'etat. And we do know for a fact that the foundation of the Mnangagwa regime is coup d'etat. So by doing all these things, he's not helping the future of Zimbabwe. And therefore, we are concerned as Africans, which is why we put out those statements as the African Election Observers Network, as Eastern and Horn of Africa Election Observers Network, as Western Africa Election Observers Network, to stand in solidarity with our citizens, colleagues in Zimbabwe, and called for their immediate release. We are not going to relent. We shall continue to push until those citizen observers are set free, because they have done nothing wrong by participating in observing elections and making sense of the elections of their own country. Thank you, Felix.
Thank you so much, Henry. McDonald, as you share what your take on the elections that some have already referred to as their sham elections, and some of those ones that they are giving us, some of those ones which Henry is sharing, that are procedural, but also kind of like provide, we all know how this is going to end. And my question here is about, for starters, because in 2018, in the aftermath, there were some pockets of post-election violence. Should we expect the same trajectory, given that already some members within the opposition are pointing out these issues that are creating some form of a dissent concerning the electoral outcomes that are already predetermined in some corners, quote unquote? What should we expect post-election? Do we see ourselves having a replica of what played out in 2018 elections?
Yeah, so thanks a lot, Felix, for that question, and I agree with and would like to thank Henry for that apt term, zombie. Yeah, indeed, you know what we are going through in Zimbabwe is an election in form only. Go to substance, you realize that we might be having something totally different. What we call that and how we characterize it, I think, is a conversation for another day. Now, what is likely to happen? The situation that we are faced with, it is possible that not necessarily what happened in 2018. So in 2018, what we had was not necessarily post-election violence, but we had the brutal matter. Citizens who were demanding that ZEC release results. They were protesting, and they were not doing so in a violent fashion. The violence was then imported into the conversation by the entry of the army into that particular process, not even the police, but the army, to deal with protesting citizens. I don't think that something like that is going to happen. It's not like that. At the state, and people are not satisfied with the explanations that they've been getting, especially from the elections management body. Already, what we are beginning to see are attempts by the state and other people affiliated with the state to try to quell citizens' content on these issues. Just last night, all over various boards and streets, people were subjected to serious beatings. I'm not sure if you read in places people came in with shambles, beat people, those establishments to close. As we speak today, there is a heightened presence of security services, especially around the Zimbabwe elections, possibly in readiness of announcing results. But here in this country, when we see army coming onto the streets, when we see heavy police presence, we know that that does not. And a lot of citizens are trying to scurry to get out of before something more dramatic and drastic actually happens. So it's a very, very tense situation. We don't know where it is going to go. What I can say is that citizens have been fairly disciplined. And at the end of the day, you know, in any other country, there would be nothing wrong with citizens registering their disquiet around how things have happened, especially in this kind of a situation where it is apparent to everyone that the election has been mishandled or mismanaged. But in this country, I think there is a lot to be afraid of, and people know that you know, protest can cost you life in this country. It's sad, but that is the reality. I'm not sure how far people will be able to be patient with what is going on. So we will be watching over the next couple of days to see what happens. But I do not see something like 2018 recurring. My biggest fear is something like 2008, where opposition members were then targeted in places where they lived. Some of them killed and found days later. Some abducted and stuff like that. But all of these are fruits of a disputed election, and the solution to that is just to hold elections with credibility. And unfortunately, we have not been able to do that in Zimbabwe this time around.
Okay, and thank you so much, McDonald. Let me quickly go back to the discussion around the citizen nation observers that were arrested and are detained. Help me understand. Of course, they're being charged for carrying out subversive activities. What, in view of whatever is happening, for benefit of understanding, what exactly does the law of the land say about citizen election observers? Is there any specific law they are breaking, given the trumped up charges that are being brought up against them? And will these charges stand? Is this just a ploy? So what happens next, and what's the situation at the moment?
Yeah, so let's start, Felix, with what is happening, or let's start with what the law says or does not say. When the observers were picked up, they were picked up with suspicion that they want election results. That is the premise that the police placed on the table. That we are stopping these people who are engaging in illegal activity with the intention of announcing election results. I can say with a fair amount of certainty, knowing these groups, that they had no such intention. No one wanted to announce. And what they were doing was what citizens observers do all over the continent, and we've also done in Zimbabwe for many. Part of what has been placed on the table is part of what tabulation, and that in itself is illegal. What is illegal is election results. If collecting election numbers around legal, then we would also expect that those people who were running those polls that Henry talked about should have been arrested as well. So there's nothing illegal about what these people were. At the end of the day, my suspicion is that the were meant to disrupt monitoring activities and to disrupt parallel voting, that there is no authentic, credible alternative that can be by what the Zimbabwe Election Commission is doing. That is the only reason why this was disrupted, so that there's only one narrative that is being put up. My hope that now that they managed to do that, that these people will not suffer for much longer and should be released. But a lot of that depends on what happens at if they're able to make it to court. But Zimbabwe is also known for operations in order to use them as examples to other people around what happens to activists who try to do legal things that are well within their rights. So I don't have a lot of confidence around that. But yeah, to your point, nothing legal was being done. There is no law against what they were doing. They were not breaking cyber regulations. They were not breaking any election regulations at all. What has happened is simply an attempt to try to put away, to get out credible voices that can be able to authenticate the results and speak to the transparency and objectivity of the commission. So that is basically what is happening on that issue of the observers.
And what's the current status quo at the moment? What's their fate? Are they still incarcerated? What's happening?
When I last checked, they were still in custody, due to be brought to court around 10 a.m. They had not when we started this conversation, but I'm hopeful that they will see their day in court. The good thing is that the lawyers have seen them, and by most accounts, they are doing. The unfortunate thing that these levels that we are talking about are themselves. The vast majority of them are young people who were capturing data and are not these kinds of things. So one can only imagine how they are feeling right now. But I know that those of them who have been doing this for some time and had anticipated trying to keep everyone else strong and safe in the knowledge that they have not broken any laws. So that speaks to your other point. What is these are that is they have no legs, but they have already achieved their objective, which disrupt the operations of the support network and the operations of the Elections Resource Center.
Wow, you are still watching the special edition of ACFIM Talks, and we are putting Zim elections into focus. I hope Henry gets back on stage. Henry, yes, I was waiting for you. Quickly, I'm picking it up from what McDonald has just been sharing. Someone may be asking, okay, citizen election observers, and wants to make a sense of what they are, what they do, and how they do what they do. Could you just a little bit help someone who is just getting to terms that citizen election observers were arrested and doesn't understand where this is coming from?
Thank you very much, Felix. And of course, it's important for our viewers to understand that when it comes to Africa, because of the still not so developed societies we have, the closest it gets to citizenry is actually those that have organized and exist as civil society, because many of our people are delinked from politics. They think politics is too far away from them, and it comes with the stages of development of a society. So when you speak, so these active citizens have obviously organized themselves into groups, and then they become what we call civil society organizations. So the constitutions of all our republics, especially for us that were formerly colonies of Britain, and therefore most of our constitutions are built on the Lancaster model. We have defined in our constitutions duties of a citizen. We have also defined rights. But one of the rights duties a citizen have is to participate in his political processes, and elections are some of those political processes. Now, these are citizen organizations that observe elections, such as ZESIN and ERC, that the Mnangagwa regime has directed they get to be arrested, are organizations that have been engaged permanently in the electoral process of Zimbabwe, political process of Zimbabwe. And some of them are also members of the Global Network for Domestic Election Monitors, GIGENDEM, which works and follows the global principles for credible elections. These were engaging in non-partisan observation. They were trying to play their role. You know, it's those organized citizens that you find organized into civil society organizations that then go back and mobilize, inform, educate the ordinary person on the grassroots to understand what is going on, but also mobilize them to participate. These organizations had been duly accredited, and when you are duly accredited, you have the right. Now, what is it that is different that they were doing different from the international observers? It's that the citizen observers are citizens of the country. They understand the context of the country. They understand the shenanigans that regimes use to manipulate elections. And if anybody was going to adduce evidence and maybe also contradict the results of the election, and I think the regime feared that the results could be contradicted because you could see that this is being doctored and manipulated in terms of the result. We know that Mnangagwa is not necessarily the most popular politician in Zimbabwe. And of course, that fear is always there that I could lose this election. We saw it in that election where Shaglai had beaten Mugabe, the one that resulted into the government of national unity. So, and I think they wanted to avoid a possible government of national unity, and they ensure that the result they want is the result that comes through. And therefore, so these organizations seem to have had the clues of projecting the real results. And so these organizations, again, the civil citizen observers, are the ones that engage the electoral reform process, because post-elections there will be lessons that will have been picked, and then the people that have been elected in office need to be engaged to make sure that they make the necessary reforms to ensure that democracy improves. But if you have done what you have done, what they have done in Zimbabwe is going to have a chilling effect on any other organization that would be wanting to work in the area of democracy. This chilling effect is repressing democracy, is suppressing democracy, and is the very reason why democracy is in decline. It is also the very reason why military coups, emerge. Now, we live in Africa, in a country that is said to be one of the youngest. We should not be blind to the fact that the young people out there who came out to vote and who are seeing the shenanigans of the regimes in office are becoming angered and more angered. If you look at what's happening, you look at the current leader of Burkina Faso, that young man, Ibrahim Traore, at 34, he had had enough. And don't think it does not inspire. And so these citizen observers were the ones that were trying to mobilize the country to make sure that they participate, but also to understand that, you see, in Africa, elections go beyond just improving democracy. Elections help us to renew peace and extend peace for at least another 5 years. In that case, then those who would have risen up and taken up violence are kind of managed, and they say, okay, let us postpone and engage in violence later. Let us give this a lease of life, wait for 5 years. So it is the citizen observers that do this. They are the ones that project the interests of citizens. They are the ones that engage with the people in power on behalf of the citizens. They are actually citizens themselves, because they have been citizens before, only that they have organized into groups that have formalized at a certain stage and become the organizations that these are calling people, criminals that have engaged in subversive activities. Back to you, Felix.
Thank you, Henry. Is running a pilot of voter tabulation an area, an issue that, among other things, that is of concern right now? Is it part of the mandate as a citizen observer? Is that within our ambit of mandate that we can also run a pilot of voter tabulation?
So when you are accredited to observe the election day, for example, they call it short-term observation. you're going to observe all the activities on election day. These activities include the opening of polling stations, the voting process, the counting of results at the end of the voting process, the transmission of results from the polling station to the tally center, and then you go on. The process is not complete until you have observed the tally center. So that is how the process goes. So there's no way you're going to observe the tally. You're going to be present at the polling station. Results are you are observing the counting of results. The results are being counted, and the declaration of results form is published and are supposed to be displayed at the polling station, and you don't pick it up. So when we pick this up, we as civil society organizations, of course, ordinarily the reason they pin them, the declaration of results forms, pin them at the polling stations, is for every citizen to see that this is what has been counted. And so for us to be now putting them together as citizen observers in a data center, that should not be a crime. But you see, the thing behind the thing that is the thing is that the regimes that doctor these results fear that if they went and declared a different result, there would be a contradicting result from civil society that would cast them in a very bad image. And therefore, they want to preempt that, nip that in the bud by ensuring that they arrest the observers. And boy, oh boy, that is exactly what they did, because by raiding the data centers, they have completely demobilized and disorganized these groups. It will take them time. Our experience in Uganda, Felix, I should tell you, the viewers, is that following the arrest, the similar activity, the similar action that was done on election day in Uganda, there were organizations that were working on democracy before that gave it up. Today, there are organizations and volunteers that have said we will never work on elections again. So this chilling effect is bad for democracy, is bad for participation. So what kind of election is that they want to organize where citizens' participation would become a crime?
Interesting. Of course, we just concluded the Sierra Leone elections, and and again there was a lot of discussions around the PVT, and until up to now they have not yet. The Electoral Commission in Sierra Leone has not yet released the official results, at least.
Absolutely, absolutely, Felix. As you remember, we were present in Sierra Leone. They did the same. And let me raise this point. I think as Africans, we need to stand and rise up to these electoral commissions that have become complicit in the maneuvers to rig elections. You know, the electoral management body is supposed to be the electoral umpire. As the electoral umpire, you are supposed to be impartial. But you see, these electoral management bodies, it's as if they've been given orders, go, and your role is to make sure that you doctor results, but in a legitimate manner, to make sure that you support the regime survival projects. And so we should also rise up to this and stand up against these electoral management bodies. What we saw in Nigeria as well, the people of Nigeria should have erupted in anger, because the electoral management body chairperson speaks from two sides of his mouth. From the left side, he says, I will transmit them the results transparently. From the other mouth, he says, I won. What is this? So I think we need to rise up as citizens of Africa and also do something about these chairpersons of electoral management bodies who seem to be taking this casually, but they're destroying our democracy and our countries. We deserve better as Africans. Back to you, Felix.
I thank you. I share emotions on that one. McDonald, let me come to you. My understanding is that this is Zim's second general election since the 2017 coup. That saw the late leader, deposed the late leader, Robert Mugabe. But what is this general feeling within the electorate about this election? What is the mood like? Give us the sense.
Yeah, so elections have always been important calendar events in citizens' life. I think come alive around their credit, to the citizens' credit, they have that elections are the only way through which power can be. It is other elites who believe that there are other ways in which power can be. So the mood is usually quite based during elections. Everyone wants to participate. Everyone wants to say they believe that a legitimate way of doing that. But in the run-up to this election, as I outlined in today, and also in the statements that were issued prior to the election day itself, there have been a lot of irregularities and concerns around capture of management body. Earlier on in the year, when they released the delimitation report that was supposed to be used for these elections, there were a lot of questions raised around the changes in boundaries and attempts at gerrymandering to ensure that at the end of the day, delimitation worked in the favor of the ruling party. Similar questions raised around registration. Issues continue to be raised around the voters' roll. Even up to election day, a lot of the political stakeholders, parties involved in the election, had not received an accurate version of the voters' roll. So these issues, and with the other environmental based on the table, impacted negatively on people's trust in the election and trust in the elections management body. So we went into an election where people were participating under protest, and a lot of that could be heard on election day itself. People saying that we know that these things are being made in order to frustrate us, but we want DEC to know that no matter what they do, we are not going until we vote. That's how strong the people is. But that is participation under protest, participation under very difficult conditions. And while others are able to do that, a significant proportion of the population had already given up on the election. They felt that their vote would not count and that the election was rigged already. So I would not be surprised if the turnout in this election is actually lower than what it was in 2018, especially in urban areas where there were clear attempts to frustrate people's participation in the electoral process.
Interesting. Participate under protest. I'm picking that one. And I was looking at the statistics. I think about 6.5 registered voters this time round. But one of the key issues that I want to raise and probably bring my question to you again, McDonald, around the women participation, because in 2018, for example, we are seeing numbers drop of women participation. In 2018, we had more women participating as presidential candidates. This time we had one. The other time I think we had 4 in 2018. And when you come to the National Assembly, I think the female candidates in 2018 were around 14%. Now they have dropped for about 11%. You are seeing a significant drop concerning women participation in politics. What could be some of the drivers that we are seeing this worrying trend?
Yeah, no. So thanks a lot, Felix, for that. And the issue of so inclusion is one of the biggest casualties in this election, and it's apparent when you go through numbers of female participants that you have gone through. Indeed, a reduction from 4 presidential race, a reduction from 364, if I'm not mistaken, to 70 women participating or running for the member of parliament race in this particular election. And these are indeed worrying numbers and worrying in terms of participation of women as candidates themselves, especially when you take into consideration that in this women actually constitute more than 52% of the population. They are by far in this country. And if our elections were representative, we would expect to see more representative spaces. Now, your question is, why is this the situation that we find ourselves in? There are a number of factors. The primary one is a cultural one. We have made violence a part and parcel of our political culture in this country. And when you make participating in political processes dangerous, the people who are most affected when you do that are women. So we need to do cultural issues around the presence of violence and negative masculinities in our politics. Those who have been brave enough to stand for office have been victims of bullying, victims of violence offline, and have been actively discouraged by our patriarchal system and tendencies not to effectively participate in these processes. So that's one reason why you don't have a lot of women on the ballot. The second one just relates to issues of space and also relates to the first past the post conversation that we started having. That kind of politics, the winner take all politics, is not representative at all. What it produces is a fallacy of representation at a national level, but it also means that there is no requirement for us to ensure that we are following a zebra system in terms of just selecting people who participate in these processes. If we had an alternative way, like for instance the party list system, I think that attempts at ensuring that there was gender parity in the process much higher. So there are systemic issues that dissuade participation, which we have to do with. So culture, the electoral itself, yeah, and old patriarchal questions that we need to resolve as part of the political conversation, fully understanding that democratization is about representation, and there is no democratization that we can be able to talk about when we are ignoring 52% of the population. So it's a major concern, but one which does not lend itself to easy answers.
Thank you so much. Of course, I was also reading a report that was alluding to the fact that the nomination fees also kind of like contributed to stumbling the participation of women. Presidential fees rose in 2018. I think there were $1,000. This time around, there were $20,000. That's astronomical, quite astronomical. Then the parliamentary rose from $50 in 2018 to $1,000, so that you could clearly see the nomination fees becoming a barrier to women participation. I was actually looking at the figures somewhere, and this was quite appalling. Even when it was contested, I think Parliament stayed it, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, there's actually a court case right now. So one of the presidential aspirants, Linda Msarira, has actually joined a constitutional court case, which is being led by civil society, and how prohibitive they are and the impact that they actually have on women's participation. But again, this issue, in order for us to get a full understanding of it, we need to understand the intersectional nature of the challenges that confront women. So it's not just the fact that they don't have money. Part of what we need to understand is why is it that they don't have money. And it takes us back to how opportunities are created and granted across the board. If women are not educated, their life chances become limited. Their access to economic opportunities become also limited, meaning that they are less likely to the kinds of funds that we are talking about. But it's an inclusion question through and through, but one that is intersectional, and also one that Henry should be able to speak to a bit more eloquently, given the fact that we are beginning to see now that representation is for sale in Zimbabwe. If you can afford to buy it, you can run. If you cannot afford to buy it, you cannot be able to stand as a representative of the people, which is very, very disheartening in itself.
Thank you so much. I think Henry, you have your comment on that. But as you come on, I'm sure you read the book, The Dictator's Dilemma at the Ballot Box, which talks about the element of electoral manipulation, economic maneuvering, and political order in autocracies. If you've read that book, you can be able to relate with whatever is happening. So just to throw in a question here, Henry. We've seen an election that many are calling a sham. We saw it in Nigeria. We're seeing it in Sierra Leone. We are seeing it now in Zim. In Uganda, we had our fair share. What is the trend? Can you project the trend of electoral democracy in Africa at the moment? We seem to be having a blueprint.
Well, there is no question on the point that democracy in Africa is not only in decline, it is actually sinking. If it has ever been there at all. As you were discussing, I was reviewing the article put out by my brother McDonald, and there is a where he wrote that ZANU-PF has mastered the art of electoral subterfuge, manipulating electoral systems and turning elections into rituals that survive, that deceive people into believing that they have power in elections without choice. And if I read that I juxtapose that with the dictator's handbook, dictator's dilemma at the ballot box, where dictators use money, sometimes soft things to money and other ways to manipulate. I have to say this, that over time we have learned that the opposition candidates and political parties have learned to thrive in those rigid contexts. And because the oppositions have learned to thrive in rigid contexts, we have now seen the autocrats moving from what you can call managed or guided democracy to zombie democracy, which we are calling zombie democracy. And we are saying there is a thread running through. If you look at most of whether it were Cameroon, whether it was Central African Republic, whether it is Democratic Republic of the Congo, whether it was Niger, where they had to remove that guy because he had become a stooge of the French, whether it's Nigeria, whether it is Uganda, whether it is Zimbabwe, that we are seeing a trend. And we are saying that the discussion we have, the narrative is that those who use soft tactics to rape democracy are also engaging in coups, especially that for them they're doing what you call civilian coups, and the other ones are engaging in hardware, pure military coups. But in essence, they are all the same. They are raping the constitutional order of their own countries. They are excluding and meting out despicable acts against the very citizens they're supposed to protect. These are the very ones that are pushing citizens to the limit, because the citizen, the voter in Zimbabwe, for example, that was saying, I have to go and vote because I cannot stand another 5 years of ZANU-PF. They have now seen what has been done. What do you expect them to do? And if there is a young man that is vibrant, that has the same ideas as Ibrahim Traore has in Burkina Faso, why wouldn't you expect a coup? And therefore, so we are seeing democracy on the back foot. We are seeing democracy to continue being on the decline in Africa and many African countries. And hey, the leaders of these countries seem not to care about the future of those countries. I don't know why they would want to envy the position that Mohamed Bazoum of Niger is in. I don't know why they can't imagine that what happened in Niger can happen to them. But if you continue pushing citizens to the limit, you're going to leave them with no choice. We have a very youthful population that is energetic, but is vulnerable, is unhappy, poor, and annoyed. You don't know when it's going to erupt. So I think Africa is in serious need of democratic renewal, and this has to be done by us. We don't even need foreign intervention. We need to rise up as citizens and take charge of our countries and make sure we decide our destinies. Otherwise, the situation is really dire and worrying. Back to you, Felix.
Thank you so much. That time is really fast spent, but I can squeeze in a couple of questions as we wrap it up. Let me come to you, McDonald. What have been some of the key election issues this time around in the 2023 elections? What have been those issues that the electorate have been fronting as the key issues that their leaders should actually focus on?
Yeah, so the electorate has been very clear. I think that the concerns that people had and were resolved through this election, or interested in countries that speak to, socio-economic issues. These are issues related to the state of the economy. As you know, we are becoming famous as a country for having a runaway inflation rate. Actually, people were interested in issues of infrastructural development and ensuring that this really means to the people. So these have sort of been the main socio-economic issues. But also survey data shows that they have lost their place of pride on the African infrastructure, our roads, our hospitals, our schools, because of poor representation of. And one of the things that they are really keen on is a government that that places back that pride on them. Zimbabweans would like to move around the continent with their heads held high. So far, we have not been able to do that enough on account of the state of our politics, on account of the state of our socio-economic conditions. So people are looking for a government that can be able to improve those things.
Interesting. So in the event, do we see the courts of law as an being one of the best preferred alternative electoral dispute resolution areas? What's the confidence level of people trusting the courts of law as alternative dispute resolution areas concerning election disputes? Given the fact that, given what's happening, already there have been voices that the elections have already been predetermined. They're just participating in a predetermined process. To what extent are the courts of law going to provide the solution?
Well, first and foremost, you know, when we are talking issues of politics and issues of elections, especially, the courts are not supposed to be the of those issues. The final arbiter around who should country is a function of people. Legitimacy should come from the people, and which is why it is important for the will of the people, because that is where legitimacy is supposed to be. The moment we find
I think we lost McDonald.
I think the point he was making, Felix McDonald, is that why do we even get to a level where we have to go to courts of law, yet the final arbiter on who gets to govern should be the people themselves. So all we have to do is to make sure that elections are genuine and that we let the expression and the will of the people prevail. If that happened, then the people will be determining who gets to govern them. Yeah, but this phenomena of guided elections, controlled elections, controlled voter consent is where the problem starts to emerge. But also for people to think that they must cling to power for as long as they can is also the other problem. Yeah, so until we have become less selfish, it does seem that many of these African leaders are driven by the desire to serve self rather than serve the citizenry. And because they have to serve self, that's why you see they cling on to power to serve themselves. Because if you're going to serve the citizenry, then you get tired and get off the stage, let somebody else take the mantle. Because nobody has the solution to the problems of Africa. You have to do your part and let another person play their part.
All right. If McDonald comes back, I will let him run with the idea. But I want to bring this to a close, and I want to give Henry to give your parting shots. What's the way forward? What should we expect? How can Zimbabwe rise out of this situation it is in? What are your parting shots to the situation?
I think I'm quite curious to see what the reports of the international observers are going to look like. I would be very surprised if the African Union or SADC give a tick or to their colleague Mnangagwa, and therefore they have to be unequivocal to the fact that this election fell far short of anything you can call credible. Actually, to not mince words, it should be that the election is not acceptable, neither to the citizens nor to the international community. So we are calling that for the immediate dropping in all those charges leveled against observers, and their immediate release unconditionally, so that they can let the citizens do their work. All the computers, the telephone, the smartphones, and the other gadgets that were confiscated should be handed over immediately. These citizens were only trying to play their role as citizens and trying to be active citizens. And to the other leaders where elections are going to happen, we are now looking at Libya and Liberia. We do not want to see a recurrence of this as citizens. As citizens, let us have the power, and as citizens, we will get angry. And when we get angry, you could not handle us. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. There you have it. That is Henry Maduzi, who is the overall coordinator of ACFIM. ACFIM is the African Election Observers Network. I was also joined before he dropped off. We had with us McDonald Aldawanika, who is the director for Southern Africa Accountability Lab, who is also a Zimbabwean national and a political science expert. I, Felix Kafuma, was the one moderating this show, and allow me to bring it to a close. Until next time, bye-bye. Continue having this conversation. Zimbabwe decides 2023. Kudos. Adios.